Welcome to Resilience Media. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show, we have two folks from Green Flag Ventures, both based in Ukraine right now, Deborah Fairlamb and Justin Zeefe. Welcome, folks. It's really exciting to have you. I've been reading a bit about what you guys are working on out there, and I know that you have a interesting thesis to talk about when it comes to investing, especially in Ukraine right now. So why
Thank
don't
you
you tell
very
me,
much.
tell me a little bit about Green Flag.
Sure.
Deborah?
Justin, do you want to start since this was your idea?
I think sure, doesn't matter. So sure, happy to do it. Green Flag Ventures is a early stage venture capital fund focused on product companies that are born in Ukraine in the verticals of dual use, defense, AI, and cyber. And we are very careful with our definition of dual use, which for us means clear and existing addressable markets, not both, but clear and existing addressable markets in civil, military, and commercial.
So can you give me an example of a startup that you've invested in or that you're looking to invest in?
We've done 5 direct deals and 1 SPV thus far, and 4 of those 5 qualify in the dual use categories around the question you're asking. A good example would be Hymera, which produces tactical handsets, radios, which compete with Motorola or Rode and Schwartz in terms of quality, except they are fully software defined and therefore much easier to bring current against adversarial efforts. And there are the same obvious markets that you'd have for any tactical handset, right? Industry, mining, forestry service, whatever, anywhere people are using handsets and want police, fire, etc.
See, that's an interesting point. I think that idea that they're, supplanting Motorola, for example. I mean, Motorola has had the radio world sewn up for decades, and that a small startup like that can come out of Ukraine and build something that could potentially disrupt that is fairly interesting. Are you seeing a lot of that coming out of Ukraine right now?
I think
Yes.
sorry, Justin, you go.
I mean, yes, but it's also not an accident the way that we're formulating our portfolio, which is based around a couple of theses we have, one of which is that focusing exclusively on returning the fund from hoping that one company out of your 10 or 20 is going to go IPO and unicorn status is not a viable approach moving forward. And so we focus more on dragons, not unicorns. And those are companies that we feel are ripe for an eventual M&A outcome. So while a company like Hymera absolutely will challenge Motorola, it's more likely to be acquired by a company of that size rather than to put it out of business.
Deborah, why don't you tell us a little bit about your view on these technologies disrupting incumbents?
I think one of the things that is not terribly well understood outside of Ukraine is actually that the entire nature of warfare has changed. This is an extremely electronic warfare environment, plus a lot of GPS denial. And that plus, in addition to all of the drones, both air and ground, that everybody is hearing about. But really, in some ways, the game-changing things that are happening are around and responding to the very heavy electronic warfare environment. And so what is happening is that companies are coming up with new software-driven products, so that it's almost what's inside is more important than what's outside. And we are seeing that, just kind of across categories in terms of the ability to be able to operate in a just heavily radio jammed, spoofed environment. No access to satellites, internet connectivity, anything like that. You cannot have cell phones out near the front door. You will be, pinged by the Russians, and you're going to have a drone overhead in 5 minutes or less. So the very nature of warfare is changing. So that means that the tools of warfare are changing. Really, again, this is not fully understood outside of Ukraine at this point, not largely anyway. And so even in the context of Western kit and Western material that it is, coming into Ukraine, a lot of it is not working. And it's not because it's bad per se, but because it was not built to be able to function in these current environments. So I think that's one of the big trends. And as that pertains to the companies that we are looking for, all of the companies that we are building or we are looking at are building for the war that Russia is fighting right now. And the other piece is that this is not just the way that Russia, Ukraine are going to fight, which is actually something I've heard, which for me is just a total head in the sand response to what's happening here, because this is very much behind the scenes, China is sending technology, North Korea is sending workers and soldiers. There's all kinds of technological exchange that is going on between what the Russians are doing with Ukraine right now, but also back to China. So this is not contained to this theater. This is actually how warfare is going to happen going.
So you would argue, Justin, you would argue that this is sort of a test for wars?
No, this is the real world, not a
Hmm.
test.
Sure,
Not
sure, sure.
pedantic, right? But there is a real difference. This is a test. This is a test for the American,
Hmm.
Western European defense manufacturers, which they are failing or have failed, largely because, to Deborah's point, their equipment is designed around an a now antiquated procurement process, that the primes are simply not nimble enough to slow down fast enough to not hit the wall. So it's to Deborah's point around warfare changing, it has. But what's important to understand, I think very few people appreciate, is that it's not iterative, it's evolutionary. This is an evolutionary shift. This is the invention of explosives. This is the invention of aircraft. This is a fundamental change in, 200 years ago, nobody was talking about air superiority, right? And right now, people are talking about battlefield superiority in the electronic realm for signals. And so that's one part of it, which Deborah mentioned. And the other, which is just as critical, is that we have moved, not are moving, but have moved away from the traditional scenario where you have tanks fighting large pieces of equipment, fighting large pieces of equipment that cost, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to put them together. Instead of moving from very large systems that you only have a few of, we flipped the paradigm on its head. And now you're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of individual units, each of which is attritable, relatively inexpensive or completely inexpensive, and fully software defined so that it can be programmed either on the fly or by itself to adapt and overcome to adversarial efforts. So there is very little in the United States arsenal that is going to survive in an open battlefield that exists now.
And Deborah, you recently announced a investment at an event in Kiev there?
Yeah. So actually, for us, it was sort of the second investment into a company we had invested in just about a year ago exactly. So we had invested at seed stage, and this is now round A. And it was actually the largest VC investment for Ukrainian defense tech company thus far. So it was a $15 million investment. It was actually led by an investment group out of New York. And most of the other investors in the round were those of us who had invested at the seed stage. So it got a nice bit of attention just for the size of it for this market. And although that actually had come on the heels of another investment that we had announced the week before, which was another Ukrainian company. So we have a very nice, robust pipeline. To Justin's point, about dual use and some of the things that we look for the business case that goes beyond just being able to sell into the military. But we also do extremely thorough due diligence in terms of not just understanding and talking to literally the soldiers who have used this tech out on the front, but we also, for every investment that we do, bring together a very hand-picked team to be able to look at it from the Western military tech perspective. And so we have had experts from the Air Force, from NASA, from RUSI, taking a look at all of the tech that we're looking at. And so it's not just is it working in this, within the theater within Ukraine, but how does it and would it and where does it fit into the broader perspective of Western military tech? So that the due diligence that we do is part of helping us understand, not just in this context, but where the plug-in capabilities are back to the West on a larger scale.
I was going to ask if I'm a VC angel in the U.S., obviously biased because I'm in New York. How do I invest in Ukraine? Do I just talk to you folks, or is there another way to do it?
I mean, it depends on the asset class that you're interested in, right? If you're
Hmm.
talking about venture, then selfishly, of course,
Sure,
we
of course.
both say us, but just because something's an investable business does not mean it's venture backable, right? So there are plenty of businesses here that would be appropriate for somebody in PE that's looking to get into the space, or someone who wants to do a roll-up strategy. There's a lot of things that could be done in that space, in defense and outside of it. When you're talking about venture, yeah, of course, we would suggest us, but there are actually a number of firms that have come in after. One that came in around the same time as us, which is MITS, and a few more that have since come online with similar theses. And it's a large enough opportunity set and a small enough ecosystem that we all tend to work together and to be in on the same deals, more or less in different percentages, but still in the same deals over time.
I mean, I think the Western quote unquote investor like to whine about that they don't want to get in on the deals because they can't trust the country, et cetera, et cetera. Do they have to be on the ground to do due diligence, or what, or is it sufficient at this point just to talk to folks on
A
Zoom?
couple of things. One, I think it's probably rather important to note that every one of our companies is domiciled outside of the country.
Okay.
And that's either in the EU or in the US.
Oh,
And
okay.
we choose our jurisdictions based on the sensitivity and probable use cases for the intellectual
Interesting.
property, as well as any import-export regulatory issues that they may face in the future. So, I was a founder before this, and I've been burned by, not knowing certain things, right? So now with a VC hat on and still able to keep my founder's glasses on, we're able to avoid a lot of the things that would have otherwise bit us over time. So like that's, one important
Well,
consideration. The other is that everything we're investing in is validated. We don't think about things from the seed, pre-seed level because in my experience, these terms have lost all objective meaning. So we focus on what we call what is called the TRL, or technology readiness level. And for us, we invest in things that are 6+, which means that it's well beyond MVP. And every one of our investments is revenue generating and increasing in their revenue, and it's all MRR or ARR as well. So it's a much more sophisticated ecosystem than I think a lot of people understand or appreciate or give credit to. As evidenced by the fact that pre-war, this ecosystem
mhm.
was growing 30% year over year for 8 years, and is on track to pass Israel in terms of raw technical talent in 18 months. There's like the deeper you look at this country from both the macro level as well as in the verticals that we're looking at, the more clear it becomes that this already was and continues to be the next frontier environment for deep tech. And it's really more that the war has catalyzed founders who were previously building in ag tech or fintech or whatever tech, to pivot towards defense, still with the mindset of building for a large enough audience that they can make it a real business. It's not just an effort to win the war and then go back to what they're doing. They understand that the strongest way for Ukraine, in my opinion, from what I've seen, they understand the strongest way to ensure a robust Ukraine is to ensure that it's A, able to defend itself, and B, has strong economic ties with its partners. And the best way to do that is to develop something that people want to buy. And that's what they're doing.
So to that point, Deborah, if what do you want to see come across your desk from a founder? What's the next big thing in your mind?
Yeah. So again, in the context of being here on the ground, we actually do have a tremendous advantage over anybody who's trying to pick what's going on here from abroad. It really is kind of difficult to just parachute into this ecosystem, which is, I think, actually one of the advantages for anybody who is looking to invest in Ukraine, is to go through one of the funds, because it's not just sort of what comes across my desk. It's also being out in the ecosystem, talking to the soldiers, getting the feedback from them about what is working. There is an entity within Ukraine called Brave One, and it's sort of a coordinating force within the defense tech ecosystem. And for the companies that go through that, they select the companies within that ecosystem based on the desirability of the products that are being proposed, as judged by the general staff, by the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Digital Transformation. So anything that's included into that ecosystem is of interest, sort of within the bigger context. And then what is sort of our job is to go through that pool that is there in look at the companies, to what Justin was talking about, is their investability, because just because they've got a great product does not mean they have the team that can take it to market or that there is a fit outside of Ukraine. Those are sort of some of the things we look for. We are not investing in drone platforms, either UAVs or UGVs. In our mind right now, drones, believe it or not, are sort of going to become a commodity in the body in and of itself. What we really are seeing is that it's the components and small standalone hardware, which is really where the interesting things that are coming up are. So when I talk about components of drones, that can be navigation, it can be swarming software, it can be like the data sets that they're collecting. One of the really, again, underappreciated things about what's happening here is the Ukrainians have been collecting data from the field, not just since 2022, but since the Russians first invaded in 2014. And so they have this unbelievable set of data of visual images, of audio, of videos, of sort of the pattern of troop movements, all of this that has just become even more valuable in, say, the last 24 months as AI has increased in its capacity. And so now it's not just, language models. Ukraine is now full of video models and photo models that they are able to use and to look at different components. So those are the kind of things that we are looking for, is more the component level rather than the full lock and loaded platform. Because again, the speed of iteration of how things are changing here, if you build the product, you lock it down, if the antennas can't be changed, if the software can't be updated, it's not going to work against the Russians in 2 months.
You both could be wearing Patagonia vests and driving your Teslas down PCH right now, Pacific Coast Highway. Why are you there?
Well, as someone who lives in Topanga and has a Tesla, I'm going to umbrage to that statement
Umbrage. I'm sorry. Yeah.
because the PCH is like 6 miles from my house.
And it's beautiful.
It is beautiful, but the fires were a bit much.
Mm-hmm.
This is the greatest opportunity for investing that I've ever seen in my lifetime, and happens to correlate directly with the clearest scenario of good versus bad that I've also seen in my lifetime. It's a no-brainer. The technology coming out of this ecosystem is going to be defining. It's not just where the puck is, it's also where the puck is going. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we would be doing everybody a disservice if we were investing in things that are going to be overcome by events in 2 months. Right. There's plenty of that. To Deborah's earlier point, there are artificial demand signals in Ukraine. Ukraine needs as many drones in the air as it can get. That doesn't mean it needs as many drone companies. It doesn't mean the world needs as many drone companies as it can get. Right. So you have to sift through that and figure it out. But if this, let's say even that we were interested in this sector, why don't we do this from afar? Because, Deborah's been on the ground here since 2007, and a trusted partner to the tech ecosystem for most of that time. And I'm believers that you have to actively engage with your companies that you're investing in, because VCs don't like to talk about this very often, but you need to keep your eye on the ball, and the ball is the exit. Right? And that should be what everybody's talking about inside the relationship between the founders and the investors, right? Like, people talk about it, it's like it's taboo, but you have to keep that in mind, because ultimately that's where you're all driving, right? So that's why we focus with our portcos on what those could be. And that's very significant part of the selection criteria when we're looking at what to invest in. So yeah, this is where it is.
Deborah, same question, but I think Justin actually
Yeah, he kind of
answered a
gave
bit of it.
Yeah, he kind of gave half my answer. So I've actually lived and worked in Ukraine for coming up on 15 years. And most of that time was spent in the intersection between business development and investment. Ukraine has undergone just tremendous, changes since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and so I have sort of watched the evolution of much as what has been occurring. And to Justin's point, I had actually been working in the broader tech sector since about 2018, and so knew an awful lot of the players who were doing the fintech and the SaaS and the B2B platforms and that sort of thing. This entire new defense tech sector very largely is driven by the incredibly smart folks and the founders who had been doing, traditional tech, and who pivoted and used their skills to be able to help fill in the gaps. That's sort of there were no new defense tech companies in Ukraine when the Russians invaded. And so everything that is here is new and homegrown. And the core of that talent actually is coming out of the pre-existing, really strong, really dynamic tech sector that had been here. So for me, it is a continuation of the drive and the growth, and just the determination that the Ukrainian tech sector has been showing, for the last 10 or so years anyway, in terms of its trajectory. It is now in the context of defense tech, because it is the imperative for Ukraine to be able to maintain and defend its own sovereignty. It is also home for me. And I think the last piece of it is really to some of the other things that Justin said, that this is really changing where things are going forward. And so I would rather be here being part of this than sort of watching from afar. And again, it's just so difficult to do from outside of Ukraine, just because you really do need to keep up with the speed of everything that's happening here.
Well, Deborah, Justin, this has been extremely enlightening, and I thank you for what you're up to out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
All right. How should folks get in touch with you?
Deborah at greenflag.vc or Justin at greenflag.vc or through our website, which is greenflag.
All right.
Or
Perfect.
just mail us a bag of money.
Oh, just a bag of money? Who do I know who has a bag of money right now? Not very many people, unfortunately. I think it's going to take a minute,
Yeah.
but we'll get some together. All right.
Thank
Deborah,
you.
Justin, thank you for joining us on Resilience.
Thank
Thank
you
you
for
so
having
much for having us, really. Take care.